Peace, everyone. We're back. I had to take a quick break, but not a quick break, but brief intermission. Ready to start again. Where we left off at was the petty kings. Okay, in order to really understand what we know today as our aristocracy families of Europe and the secret societies and orders and things of that nature, that shift of power took place during the Crusades. That's when all of the knowledge from the East the secret knowledge from the East began to spread to the West, because they were familiar with it. They were familiar with the Moorish secrets, because the Moors had, conquered, Europe pretty much. And there's two dynasties, the Almoravids and Almohads, and they are the Almoravids. That's a Spanish name for Almorabitan. We'll get into that as well. But the main thing is that these particular what you would call crusades, actually began to they were actually non-crusades, and they began to look for that secret knowledge from the East, that enlightenment. Okay, sort of like what Hitler did when he went around looking for the relics. Okay, so before we jump, right back into the petty kings, I want to start with, pretty much reading a couple of definitions for you all, and we can get to the bottom of certain things. Okay, so give me 1 second. Now, just to dispel some of the myths involved with some of this stuff, we have the term Illuminati. This is the etymology for it. Illuminati, 1590s, from Latin illuminatus, enlightened, in a figurative sense, originally applied to a 16th century Spanish sect called the Alumbrados, then to other sects. Since 1797, used as a translation of German Illuminaten, name of a secret society founded in 1776, which was the year that the United States claimed its independence. Okay, in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, and holding deistic and republican principles, hence used generally of free thinkers and sarcastically of those professing intellectual enlightenment. Illumination, because the etymology for Illuminati tells you to go look up illumination. Illumination is spiritual enlightenment, from Old French illumination, from Latin illuminatium, okay, from illuminaire, to throw into light, from in, with assimilation of into the following consonant, lumen, light, related to lucer, to shine, see light, meaning the action of lighting is from 1560s. So pretty much, how all the religious texts say, come out of the dark into the light, and you reach spiritual enlightenment. I can get real deep into that, but that really just means, what they talk about, raising your chakras and your pineal gland, opening up the crown chakra and all that good stuff. But pretty much it has to do with those who have the knowledge of building civilization. That's the root of what it comes down to. And when you look at the term nobility, etymologically, is from late 14th century, quality of being excellent or rare, from Old French nobility, nobilitas, nobleness, from nobilis, well known, prominent, meaning quality of being noble rank or birth. That's very important. Quality of being of noble rank or birth. is attested from mid-15th century. Sense of noble class collectively is from 1520s. So, some of these terms are fairly and relatively new in regards to, their actual application in the European continent as far as the English term nobility. It tells you to go see noble. Noble was early 13th century, illustrious, distinguished, worthy of honor or respect, from Old French noble, from Latin nobilis, well known, famous, renowned, of superior birth. Earlier nobilis, knowable, from nocer, to come to know. See? From Proto-Indo-European English, gno, gno, see know. The prominent Roman families which were well known provided most of the republic's public officials, meaning distinguished by rank or title. So you see, nobility takes you back to Gnosis or Gnostics. You see, now since their whole foundation, which helped Europe rise after the fall of Rome and the Moors taking over, in order to fight back the Moors, they had to, utilize that Christian knowledge that they was getting. Okay? But they had to go to the Holy Land to get it. And that's when they learned the truth about Christianity. And that's when they learned the actual truth about, the origins of what they're calling the Christ, so to speak. Okay, as we already went through the pictures and showed you what the Gnostics, and the root word to Gnostic is gnosis, know, so on and so forth. Alright? And by rank or title, birth is first recorded from late 13th century. Sense of having lofty character, having high moral qualities, is from 16th century. A noble gas is from 1902. It take you on and some other stuff. Is so called for its inactivity or inertness. A use of the word that had been applied in Middle English to precious stone, metals, etc., or similar quality. Late 14th century, from the sense of having admirable properties. Okay? Now, we'll get into the Roman province in a minute, because that's just some information that I have to go over with you all. But back to the Berber stuff, we're going to touch back on that. Etymologically, is from Arabic name for aboriginal people, west and south of Egypt. See perhaps ultimately from Greek barbaros, barbarians, see Barbary. Okay? Now it's telling you that from 1842, the term Berber is an Arabic name for aboriginal people west and south of Egypt. And when you look up the term Africa, they saying Africa, but Africa comes from the Roman, the Roman adaptation, from them calling it the province of the province of Africa, excuse me. However, in Arabic, it's applied for aboriginal peoples west and south of Egypt. Let's skip some of these definitions. We'll go back to it. But it tells you to see Barbary. Okay? Barbary. From 13th century, foreign lands, especially non-Christian lands. From Latin, barbaria, see barbarian, meaning Saracens living in coastal North Africa. Remember we talked about the Saracens? It's attested from the 1590s via French, Old French Barbarie. From Arabic, barbar, Berber, ancient Arabic name for the inhabitants of North Africa, beyond Egypt. Perhaps a native name, perhaps an Arabic word from Barbara to babble confusedly, but this might be ultimately from Greek, barbaria. The actual relations, if any, of the Arabic and Greek words cannot be settled, but in European languages, barbaria or Barbary or Barbary have from the first been treated as identical with Latin barbaria, Byzantine Greek barbaria, land of barbarians. Alright, now it's clear. I've seen other definitions that said that's actually what the Greeks called them, or came up with that term as well. And that the Arabs, which, you know, same people but just different lands, they from Arabia, they actually carried the Greek knowledge into, you know, Europe, because they had fell and they didn't know anything about anything as well. But when you look up barbarian, it says from the mid 14th century, from Middle Latin barbaranus, Old French barbarin, Berber, pagan, Saracen, barbarian, from Latin barbaria, foreign country, from Greek barbaros, foreign, strange, ignorant, from Proto-Indo-European base, barbar, echoic of unintelligible speech of foreigners, from Sanskrit barbara, stammering, also non-Aryan. Greek barbaroi meant all that are not Greek, but especially the Medes and Persians. Originally not entirely pejorative, it's since darkened after the Persian Wars. The Romans, technically themselves barbaroi, took up the word and applied it to tribes or nations which had no Greek or Roman accomplishments. So we see that the term Berber isn't really a designation for anyone. It's not a name of a nationality. It's not a name of a tribe or people. It's conquerors or colonists that are actually using the term because they couldn't understand the foreign language. All right, now let's go back up real quick and read what Punic is. Punic is pertaining to Carthage, 1530s, from Latin punicus, early Phonicus, Carthaginian, originally Phoenician, adjective, Carthage having been founded as a Phoenician colony from Phoenix, from Greek Phoenix or Phoenician. Proverbial among the Romans as treacherous and perfidious. Punic wars were 3 wars between the Romans and the Carthaginians. They fought between 264 to 146 BCE. This is before the Christian era. See, it's important to understand that because, well, let's just see the next one. It says Phoenician, late 14th century, from Middle French, Phoenician, from Latin, Phoenice, from Greek, Phoink, perhaps land of the purple, source of purple dye, identical with Phoenix, but the relationship is obscure. But the whole point is, they called them that because, as I showed you the trade routes, what they would do is they would take this sea creature and create purple dye from it. That's why purple is the royal colors. Okay, so we see that the term Phoenician is not an actual term. See, this is all coming from Greek and Roman perceptions. You see what I'm saying? So Phoenician is not even a real people. And Carthage comes from Kadash, which was the actual term that the Canaanites, or what they were called Carthaginians, was using. Okay, so as we look at Almoravids, a Muslim Berber horde from the Sahara. You see, we already know what Berber is, okay? A Muslim Berber horde from the Sahara, which founded a dynasty in Morocco, 11th century, and conquered much of Spain and Portugal. The name is Spanish, from Arabic al-Murabitun. Okay? There you go. So we clearly see, now look, 11th century means, you know, that was actually, you know how like the 1900s is actually what they call the 20th century. And we in the 2000s, but they call it the 21st century. I never understood why they did that in the first place. It doesn't make sense, but that's how they catalog it. So that's starting from the 1000s or the thousands. I don't know how you would say that, but you know, that's what it is. But we're going to pause there, and I'm going to take you to this right here, which we ended off on, which is the era of the petty kings. Okay, the era of the petty kings. Now, from 1031, Christian era or common era, they're interchangeable. 1086 Common Era. That's 55 years. Okay, so for 55 years, the Moorish nobility and sovereigns were fighting over each other. Okay, they were fighting. The infighting that was caused was due to the usurpation of various different rulers, and we're going to read through some of them. In 1031, the Castilians under Sancho II and Rodrigo Diaz el Cid defeat the Leonese or the Leonese. Alfonso VI of Leon leads a campaign against Muslim Badajoz, a province of western Spain, but withdraws when the Emir Mamun of Toledo intercedes. Okay, now we go to 1039. 1039 says that religious reformer Abd Allah ibn Yasin attracts Berber converts and founds a Rabat, fortified retreat in the Sahara, which becomes the base for the Almoravid movement in North Africa. Ferdinand I of Castile-Leon, like his father Sancho III, claims the title Emperor of all Spains. The Jewish Wazir minister Samuel Ha-Najib leads the Muslim Zirid army of Granada in several battles against the forces of the Abbadid kingdom of Seville. Other Taifa states, petty kingdoms, vie with each other as well. As we move to 1045, scholar Ali ibn Hams, having renounced political service, produces numerous theological, legal, and moralistic writings in addition to the Talq al-Hamamah, the Dove's Necklace, a compendium of humorous observations about love and human nature at Zaragoza. Solomon ibn Gabaral composes Judeo-Arabic poetry, a famous moral treatise, and the Megor Hayim, the Fountain of Life, a philosophical work that influenced Christian scholastic debates in 13th century Europe. So the whole concept of the Fountain of Life came from this particular scholar. All right. Now we're on to 1036. Pope Alexander II sends a combined force of Italian, Norman. Now we already read about the Normans, right? Okay. When I showed you the videos in the earlier video, it says Pope Alexander II sends a combined force of Italian, Norman, French, and Spanish knights against the Muslim-held fortress of Barbastro in the north, massacring many inhabitants and enslaving the rest. The Almoravid leader Yusuf ibn Tashufin founds the capital city of Marrakesh and begins expanding his empire northward throughout Morocco and Algeria. That's who you call Yusuf. They called him Yusuf, the Sultan of Africa, who fought back after Pope Alexander tried to, make those moves on them. In 1066, Granadan scholar Abu Ishaq writes a lengthy poem rebuking the Berber rulers of the city and accusing the Wazir, Joseph Ha-Najib, of having too much political influence. His followers kill the Wazir and massacre several hundred Jews in Granada. As we go to 1068, the Castilians under Sancho II and Rodrigo Diaz el Cid defeat the Leonos. Alfonso, there's something wrong with this, but it repeats it. Pretty much they had that war and all that battle, and they withdraws when they seen the Mahmoud of Toledo jump inside of that. But moving on to 1075, the Berber Zirid rulers of Granada reject a Castilian demand for tribute, but Al-Mutamid, the emir of Seville, agrees to pay. A joint Muslim Castilian force make raids in the region of Granada. Muslim Toledo takes control of Cordoba from Seville with the help of Castilian troops. So here you see the Muslims and the Christians link up to go bang on Cordoba and Seville. Okay? Now in 1080, the Banu Hud rulers of Zaragoza build the Al-Jafariya fortress and palace. Rodrigo Diaz, El Cid, becomes a mercenary after being exiled by Alfonso IV of Castile. El Cid enters the service of the Muslim rulers of Zaragoza. So he just went from fighting for the Christians to fighting for the Muslims. At the Battle of Almenar in 1082, El Cid's Zaragozan forces defeat the combined Muslim-Christian army of Valencia, Loretta, Aragon, and Barcelona. On to 1085. Now, pretty much all you see is that they pretty much were fighting over kingdoms. Like Spain was the entrance into North Africa and the rest of the Mediterranean is for pretty much most of Europe. Alfonso VI of Leon Castile takes control of Toledo, where he once sought refuge under the Muslim king Mamun. Now if you drop the M, you got Amun. I just want to point that out. From his brother Sancho, and claims the title of Emperor of all of Spain. Alfonso supports the translation of Arabic scientific works into Latin and permits 6 parishes in the city to continue to use the Mozarabic Christian rite. Muslim inhabitants from one of the earliest Mudejjar communities living under Christian rule. Now on to 1086. The Taifa rulers Ibn Balugin of Granada and the Al-Mutamid of Seville invite the Almoravid leader Yusuf ibn Tashufin to Al-Andalus to prevent further losses to the Christians. The Almoravids defeat Alfonso VI's forces at the Battle of Zalaca several years later. Ibn Tashufin returns to take control of numerous Taifa states and exile their rulers. Al-Andalus is incorporated into the large Berber Empire based in North Africa. Okay? We already know they talking about the same people and stuff like that, but there you clearly see that that whole era of 55 years was pretty much an era where it were petty Christian kings and petty Muslim kings. And this is where you see your largest transition of, Muslims or Muslim Moors in general, turning over to Christianity. Now I wanted to set that era clearly because it's like the bottleneck of events that take place afterwards. Right after this era of petty kings, you have something called the Crusades. Now let's get into the Crusades. But before we get to the Crusades, let me point this out about the Punic Wars, because the Punic Wars came right before, like the Punic Wars is what made Rome what it is at the time, made it what it was. And it was largely a naval war, and they were largely fighting over hemp, believe it or not. The first Punic War was 264 to 241 BC. The second Punic War was 218 to 201 BC. And the third Punic War was 149 to 146 BC. Now after the second Punic War is where they had Mauritania Sequestris, and Mauritania, they had another term for it, but it was called Mauritania before that. But when the Romans came in, they added another appellation on the end. It wasn't until after the third Punic War that you had the actual Roman province of Africa. Okay? Just a little bit about it, because Rome is always in the place, whether they running under the Roman Empire or the Holy Roman Empire with Catholicism. The Roman province of Africa was established after the Romans defeated Carthage in the Third Punic War. People from all over the empire migrated into the Roman Africa province. Most importantly, merchants, traders, and mainly veterans in early retirement who settled in Africa on farming plots promised for their military service. Historians like Theodore Mommsen estimated that under Hadrian, nearly a third of the eastern Numidian population, roughly modern Tunisia, was descended from Roman veterans. See the mixing that took place? And the name Berber appeared for the first time after the end of the Roman Empire. Okay? Now let's get into this Crusades. The Crusades were a series of religiously sanctioned military campaigns called by the Pope and waged by kings and nobles who volunteered to take up the cross, with the main goal of restoring Christian control of the Holy Land. Now remember, it was brothers over there. You seen what the early Christians drew Jesus as. Okay? You see what that was about. All right? So now this is after the Romans picked up Christianity or Christendom with the because prior to the Nicene Council and the Nicene Creed and the Romans picking up Christendom, well, it was called Christendom. Then they turned it into Christianity. All right? The Crusades were a series of religiously sanctioned military campaigns called by the Pope and waged by kings and nobles who volunteered to take up the cross, with the main goal of restoring Christian control of the Holy Land. The Muslims had took it over, okay, at the advent of Islam through the Prophet Muhammad. The Crusaders came from all over Western Europe and fought a series of disconnected campaigns between 1095 and 1291. So right after this era of petty kings, which ended in 1086, about 13 years later, you have 1095, which is the beginning of the Crusades, where they pretty much just went to the Holy Land to rob and steal and to find out the secrets. All right? Historians have given them numbers. Similar campaigns in Spain and Eastern Europe continued into the 15th century. The Crusades were fought mainly by Roman Catholics against Muslims and Greek Orthodox Christians in Byzantium, with smaller campaigns waged against pagan Slavs, pagan Balts, Mongols, and Christian heretics. Orthodox Christians also took part in fighting against Islamic forces in some crusades. Crusaders took vows and were granted a plenary indulgence by the Pope. The Crusades originally had the goal of recapturing Jerusalem and the Holy Land from Muslim rule, and their campaigns were launched in response to a call from the leaders of the Byzantine Empire, which later became the Ottoman Empire, for help to fight the expansion of the Muslim Seljuk Turks into Anatolia. The term is also used to describe contemporaneous and subsequent campaigns conducted through the 16th century in territories outside the Levant, usually against pagans, heretics, and peoples under the ban of excommunication for a mixture of religious, economic, and political reasons. You notice there's no racism, and you don't hear anything about racism in that. Rivalries among both Christians and Muslim powers led also to alliances between religious factions against their opponents, such as the Christian alliance with the Sultanate of Rome. during the Fifth Crusade. Okay? The Crusades had some temporary successes, but the Crusaders were eventually forced out of the Holy Land. Nevertheless, the Crusades had major far-reaching political, economic, and social impacts on Europe. Because of internal conflicts among Christian kingdoms and political powers, some of the Crusade expeditions were diverted from their original aim, such as the Fourth Crusade, which resulted in the sack of Christian Constantinople and the partition of the Byzantine Empire between Venice and the Crusaders. The Sixth Crusade was the first crusade to set sail without the official blessing of the Pope. The Seventh, Eighth, and Ninth Crusades resulted in Mamluk and Hafsid victories, as the Ninth Crusade marked the end of the Crusades in the Middle East. So that's your whole Crusades in a nutshell, which started right after the infighting between the Moors. Even the Christians had some of their own infightings, but it was mainly the Muslim Moors who had this infighting going on, okay, which led to the weakening of the trade and allowed for the Crusades to take place. And there were 9 Crusades. Now, this part is the actual meat and potatoes of this presentation, and it's dealing with pretty much it's pretty much dealing with how the money flowed, what they went into Jerusalem for. You understand? How Cush play a role. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into this, okay? And this was sent to me by one of my peoples out of LA. Honest to the LA Moor who sent this to me. He wants to remain anonymous. He was doing some of this research for me. He wants to remain anonymous, as well as the Asiatic who assisted him in putting it together. So you know, I'll put it out there because it gets real deep. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to this right now. All right. Make sure you all watch this real closely. Okay. The history of banking. Where did King Solomon's treasure go? An Asian perspective. Alright. It starts with King Solomon in Jerusalem around 930 BC. A very successful king who amasses huge wealth, especially gold. He has some 600 wives and concubines and thousands of kids. Considering that he knows his country will fall apart after his death, and selects one of the most trusted wives, Queen Sheba or Balquish, to protect the assets, bloodline, and tradition. Now, everybody know Queen of Sheba was from Kush, or right across from Kush. Well, Arabia was part of Kush anyway, but what they call modern-day Yemen. All right. Sometime after, she leaves with everything back to where she probably came from, Jawa. There she established the courts of what later became known as Solo Jawa. They're safeguarding the gold assets, King Solomon's bloodline, and the religious traditions of his court. Now, it's very important to understand this perspective, because the Knights Templar after the Crusades is what emerged to become your Illuminati or Masons. Okay, that's what they pretty much became. And we're going to get into some of that right here, right now. Let me just set some of this straight for you all. I'm going to try to go through this as fast as possible, but you know, responsibly. But you got to check out the graphs that's in this. You got to check out the graphs. They're safeguarding the gold assets, King Solomon's bloodline, and the religious traditions of his court. Now notice that the seal of Solomon, or Suleiman, is what's on the Moroccan flag. Okay? So This treasure, is so paramount. We just gonna go through it. All right. Do you all see this particular chart? Do you see the graphs? Let me zoom it out a little bit more so you can see it all. Let me know in the chat if you all can see it clearly, because I want to make sure that you all can see it. Alright. Now, as you see here, Solomon, 930 BC, sends it out, Solo Jawa, Templar movement, gold flows, gold certificates. History of world banking. The gold pile grows. There are huge flows of gold into Indonesia, which is a Muslim country now. It's a Muslim country. From China during the 1300s. China almost goes broke buying spices and wood. From Europe in the 1400 to 1600, most of the gold taken from South America ends up in Indonesia as payment for spices, which are the most sought after goods in the world at the time. See how it's intertwined with this spice trade? Now, if anyone has paid attention to certain things, the street value on certain CDS substances is the same price as gold. Alright, spices. So if you see the actual flow chart, you see Solomon 930 BC in the Solo Jawa. China sends some more over there as well in the 1300s, and in the 1400s the spice trade. The royal Solo family ties are expanded to include Chinese royals. 1000 AD. A few knights spend 9 years in Jerusalem digging out the ruins of King Solomon's temple. They discover something that makes them very powerful once back in Europe. They get special privileges from the Pope, and the Templar Knights Order is established with direct access to the Pope. I hope you all can see the charts clear as well, because they're going to keep developing. They quickly become the European protector of wealth and the pilgrims to Jerusalem that leads to the establishment of the first working banking system throughout Europe. People of means can deposit their wealth with the Templar Knights and then draw from it once they are in the Holy Land. 1064 AD, they first established a connection with the old Solomon bloodline in Jawa. October Friday the 13th, 1307, the Templars are now a very rich, powerful, and independent from church and state European-wide organization. The French king, together with the Pope, has conspired to confiscate their assets and destroy their power all over Europe on Friday the 13th of October 1307. Templars are hunted down, jailed, and killed. Their assets and land holdings are confiscated. On Friday the 13th, 1307, the Templars flee and hide in three main directions. One group goes up into the mountains of Central Europe in what eventually becomes Switzerland. One group flee north and established a safe haven in northern Scotland and Scandinavia, while the third group flee west to Portugal, from over where they follow over to America eventually. Do you just want to make sure you all see the flow charts? Just get a real good look at them. From the 1400s to the 1500s AD, the Scottish Templar group leaves. This is where you get your Scottish rights. Remember? See, Switzerland and Scotland, your Scottish right and your York right. That's the beginning phases of that. In 1400 to 1500 AD, the Scottish Templar group leaves and travels all the way to Indonesia, which is a Muslim country, where they set up a base at Madura. They unite with the Solomon bloodline in Jawa. 1600s to 1700 AD, the Templars in Jawa, together with their brothers in the Alps, start issuing paper certificates backed by gold. A piece of paper that represents a certain amount of gold and can be easily moved and lent out. Interest is 2 to 3% year payable in gold. 1700s to 1800 AD, one German banker backing a local prince quickly catches on to this and sees the huge potential. They eventually change their name to Rothschild. He has 5 sons who are sent out across Europe to establish banks, one in each chosen country. They establish in England, France, Italy, Germany, and Austria, where they become the King's Bank, or as we call them now, the Central Bank. See these charts? First to be established was the Bank of England. Instead of lending the English king gold bullions to use for paying for war efforts, they get the right and only them to issue papers representing that gold, paper money. The king's loan will run an 8% interest for eternity, paid in gold. No need to pay the principal, since the Rothschild in his turn borrows gold certificates at an interest of 2 to 4% per year. Okay, 2 to 4% per year. He is on to a very good business. The only limit to their banking profits is the need of the king to borrow money. The more the king or kings need to borrow, the better. With a spread of 4 to 6% year, it has a huge potential. Now, with his sons firmly established in all the important corners of Europe, the best way to make money is to make sure the kings go to war against each other and finance all of them. They win either way all the time. Napoleon. What better person to support for the end than what better person to support for that end than Napoleon? A small guy with a huge ego and worldwide ambitions, which Napoleon said he longs for the day that Islam takes over the world so he can take over Islam and rule the world. The Napoleon Wars is what really got the Rothschilds started. For example, the Battle of Waterloo. Thanks to their superior network, they knew before anybody else who won, and that alone put them in place to clean up on all the financial markets of their day. The players knew to watch what Rothschilds was doing, which they used to their full advantage. First, sell to get the avalanche going, and when the flock is in full panic mode, selling at any price. They quietly stated buying it all at rock bottom prices. That is how they played the London financial market on the day of the Battle of Waterloo. They absolutely cleaned up. On top of that, there's also what all the various kings involved had to pay in interest on their loans. From then on, the rest is history on how they managed to put themselves as key players. in the distribution of funds throughout the Western world and later throughout the whole world. They don't necessarily own the fund's assets, but they 100% control the main banks and its distribution chain that distributes these assets. Now, this was all done based on Solomon's gold and the gold they took from the Americas. Bank of China and Bank of Japan also eventually gets established by Asian counterparts. In an agreement signed in 1857, all Asian territories agreed to have BOE, Bill of Exchange, oversee and control all macro banking aspects in their territories, and that agreement still stands. Today, 5 out of 7 central banks in the G7 group are controlled by Rothschild's interests. The Federal Reserve. The last central bank to be established was the Fed. The Americans resisted the central bank idea for the longest time, and it took a banking crisis together with some very long political games to finally get them to accept the idea under the name of Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Now, in 1913 was when they bring up Noble Drew Ali started his campaign. It has rightfully been called the crime of the century. The Chinese royal family, tracing its roots back to the Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan, always had very close ties with their Indonesian relatives. When mainland China goes through its upheavals during Mao, their assets are moved first to Taiwan, later to Indonesia. The same goes for the Shah of Iran. His main assets are also held and safeguarded here after the 1950s. 900 to 1000 AD, high priests in Jawa gets direction from God that they have to travel to Bali, Little Jawa, and establish a successful colony. First attempt fails and they go back. Some 100 years later, they receive a second direct command from God to do the same. God gives direction for 3 nails, gold, silver, and bronze, to be nailed down and a temple established. Now they succeed. By 1500s, the whole royal courts of Solo moves here to safeguard the traditions and culture from the pressures of Islam taking over on Jawa. Further exploration and people go east. There are really interesting linguistics and cultural traces pointing to close contact between Jawa, Bali, and Polynesian, Mayan, and Native Americans. A few ex-Hawaii Kiki, Honolulu, Mayo Maori has meaning in Old Javanese language. Mayan and Bali calendars almost identical symbols. Native American names and traditions can be found in Indonesia as well. Just making sure y'all get that flow chart. This is the Illuminati breeding program. 1200 to 1300 AD, Queen Roro Kidul, a beautiful illuminated being marries the king of Solo. She shines to the effect of lighting up a room and never grows old. A special being that promises to always protect the kingdom and return when needed. Her bloodline continues with the last name of Chakra Ningrat, the Illuminated. Now check this out. You got Chinese, Middle East, European, Asian, Templar Knights. 128 royal families start a breeding program. From 1300s to 1700s AD, royals marry royals and none other. The Jawa bloodline was important. and Chinese royals, Middle Eastern royals all intermarry. In 1700, all major wars are basically in between close or distant royal family members. They are all related one way or other. They fight over land and wealth. With advancing technology, wars gets more and more destructive. An enlightened moment, some agree to try and systematically do something about it. The Napoleon Wars in Europe was a very good reason to stop family interfighting around 1750. 128 of the most important royals agreed to a breeding plan. They married or had kids following a system having their respective first son/daughter mate according to the same plan. Objective: create the King of Kings, the enlightened one, a person who would equally represent each and every one of the participating 128 royal families of the world. 64, 32, 16, 18, you can see, 8, you can actually see the chart, as it continues to grow. Over the course of 7 generations, they slowly bring down the numbers from 128 to 64 to 32, 16, 8, 4, and 1. Finally, in the year 1900, the one is born. Now they have one person who can honestly say, I represent all of you. Let's call him N1, short for monetary one. With M1 in existence, it's time to move on to the next step in the plan. In 1920 to 21, they start to consolidate, call back their combined wealth with the intentions of placing it into the hands of M1. M1 is then to redistribute the combined wealth of the world according to an agreed upon plan. Economic basis for 140 plus nations plus 100 plus banks. 9 of the most prominent royal families representing different regions of the world were driving this project together with the Chinese royal KS. One of the most active and respected among them were PBX, Pacu Bueno X, M1's biological father, and the King of Solo from the Chakra Ningrat or the Illuminated Solomon bloodline. As you see this chart, the assets from each nation go into the big recall. This is when you actually seen all of the countries start to incorporate as opposed to being countries that they were before. At the turn of the 1900s or the 20th century, that marked the beginning of corporate governments in its strictest application. That's what they became. It says this creates the 1928 credit crunch. It's quite similar to today's situation. So in 1928, PBX calls a meeting in Solo, Jawa, for all the 128 families to attend. Here they sign a POA, power of attorney, transferring all their assets, all of their combined assets, into the hands of M1. He is then supposed to distribute this wealth according to an agreed upon plan called the Plan of the Experts. The Plan of the Experts, they feel, is divine. It's driven by a genuine attempt to better the fate of all mankind and bring them all into a material level of comfort, after which man is free enough from daily troubles to pursue mankind's ultimate goal of unity with God for each and every one. It is a long worked upon plan of unifying the world for as good as possible, for as many as possible. That was their basic guiding principle. How was it supposed to work? According to the Plan of the Experts of 1928, If you have all of the money in the world and you want to make that a better and more equal world, how would you go about doing it? It is a serious question. The people faced with that problem / opportunity planned it along these lines, all with very good intentions. First, collect it into one big pot, set someone you trust in charge, but have checks and balances in place. Check out this chart. Future world government, UN. Power transfers to UN when ready, when the world is ready. One of the primary objectives was to free the nations from colonialism. These new nations should be governed as guided democracies. So up on top of the world power pyramid, there should be a forum where every nation has a voice and a vote. When ready, M1 should transfer his power to that world government body. It was called the United Nations. Alright, this is the chart breakdown. This is government funding tracking of all major funds, government side of world finance, central bank of the central banks. All these new and old independent nations need financing. To supply that and track all major funds, movements, you need a central bank to all the central banks. BIS, y'all could go Google this and go to their website. Bank of International Settlements is the bank that pretty much runs every other bank in the world. That's where, it's bigger than the DTC. It's where I've actually come across dealing with them because of some other stuff I had going on. But the Bank of International Settlements, y'all can go check that out right now. The Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland was planned to be set up for that purpose, to give everybody access to the best and brightest regarding infrastructure and financing. The World Bank was incorporated. Excuse me. The WB job is to employ the best in their fields, who then plan projects and infrastructure solutions around the world. They will also finance projects that cannot meet normal commercial bank requirements. They do approve cash utilizations from Fed and other banks. Your project needs a WB approval to give finance. To feed the private side of the world finance with cash, you need an outlet. The Fed were to take this role. It was to be the cash cow of the world on the private side of banking. Now, if you notice anything in the bailout, and you actually see them hear them in their Senate hearings, they actually they start talking about that discount window. It's not a mythology. When you hear all those Moors and all those other sovereign citizens talking about the discount window this and the discount window that, the Fed actually opened it up to all financial institutions, which was why when we was talking on the Liberated Speak show about how many more millionaires was actually created in the world, it's just that you have to have a financial institution to get access to it. They were to supply all the prime banks with funding, the top 25 around the world, not just American, but all others as well. Here is where it started to all go wrong, or to go all wrong. The Fed became a political tool to push power agendas. Its owners eventually hijacked the whole system. To help failing economies and guide them along, they needed the IMF. Their work was to be the lender of last resort. We will help, but here's where guided democracy comes into play. All the planned new small independent nations would at times run into trouble, and the IMF was supposed to be there to help fix things. Now remember, in the 60s, they said that the colonial powers, y'all got to go check out the UN records on it, where the indigenous, it says it in there that all colonial powers have to turn over everything, back to the indigenous peoples. This is in the 60s. You see what I'm saying? And they say one of the best ways for indigenous people to deal with that colonialism is to incorporate. You understand? But in the 60s, you had Ghana, Nigeria, all these new countries started, well, that's when the African countries and certain other countries in Asia started to come to their independence. But the independence for everybody else in the world started around the 1900s. And then it changed and shifted a little bit. And you actually seen in the early 1900s the fall of the caliphates. Caliphates were all around, all the way up until I think 1924. If Ilamir's in the chat, he can clarify on that a little bit more. But you know, so there was a global shift. Everything was shifting, and then World War II happened, and that's when they came out with the United Nations, because they tried before with the League of Nations after World War I. You see, but it wasn't until the 60s till you started to see all of these African countries come into a limited independence, so to speak. All the planned new small independent nations would at times run into trouble, and the IMF was supposed to be there to help fix things. Now, you know, the World Bank is the United States tool, and the IMF is the European Union tool. All right, justice. To solve international legal cases and humanitarian issues across national borders, they needed an international court of justice. Now, you know, the funny thing about it is the only people who's been tried in the International Court of Justice successfully has been what's the guy name from Bosnia? No, was it Bosnia? Milosevic. And the rest has been all of the African heads of states. Those are the only people who went through the International Court of Justice, got convicted, tried and convicted, so on and so forth. And then I think they did that with Saddam Hussein. But The Hague fills that role. One of its offspring is the Geneva Convention. Now, see, this is all about governing bread, assets, resources from family estates who could trace their estates, you know, all the way back to, you know, Solomon and all these other people, you know. Later in the scheme, once the new nations are firmly established and functional, you can join them into bigger blocks, all for the purpose of unity and peace and togetherness. The USA could stand as a good example, and similar solutions were foreseen for Europe, Africa, and Asia as well. I hope y'all catching the actual structure chart on the left side of what I'm reading. These projects are still on the drawing board, but if you study today's news, you can see how the seeds are there. Just as with the EU, it is quietly there until suddenly the time is right and things move very fast. The difference from what was originally planned is that other forces are now pushing the same agenda for control reasons. These are very approximate timelines. Time will tell when it all happens and how it is implemented. As it stands today, we will end up with one or two solutions. Right now, there is a fight of control going on. A world paper currency backed by gold, governed by a multinational assembly. Or two, a cashless society solution where ultimately the banks or its owners control the money supply and flows. Now, if you peep what's going on, this is why we did the show on Thursday about the global power shift. Because if you pay attention closely, you see that Zimbabwe is getting investments now from China, and Zimbabwe is backing their currency with gold. You see, so what you actually have is certain nations going back to gold standards. You see, so there's a fight between resource-backed economies or cashless economies where the banks control everything. Alright? Now, the objective was to break down colonialism, free the nations, and create equal start, control the new nations through debt, unify the world as good as possible for as many as possible. Okay? A freedom war and economic stress on the colonial powers. That was the objective in the breakdown of colonialism. Free the nations and create equal start, so on and so forth. I just read that. Alright, now here's where it's branching off. The U.S. is the first country to get access to big funding according to the plan of the experts. Fed borrows huge amounts and funds the New Deal in the 1930s. The U.S. is set to be the great liberator of nations and the champion of democracy. To achieve this, the intention is for the U.S. to build up military, function as world police, control the outcome of the future, World War II. World War II is after World War II is when you started to see, that's when they created the State of Israel. They started all of these different things after World War II. And that's when the United Nations came into place. Because like I said, before that, it was the League of Nations. Now, World War II was the basis, will create the basis for the UN. It creates the basis for the European Union and frees the nations. In 1946, 3 Marshall Plans are set up within the UN to fund the world after World War II. So World War II was created to try to break down, they tried to, break down colonialism and all that, but because after that they passed that law, about handing everything back over to the indigenous people, but you know how they do. They don't never follow through on nothing. And free the nations and create equal start was supposed to be in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Alright. Stemming from the 3 Marshalls, that stems and goes towards and creates the need for a new way to create cash only, partly based on gold. Bretton Woods, 1942 to 43. From that, you had your hyper accounts, trading systems within the Fed that creates money out of nothing. Checks and balances do apply. And from that, it leads to more power to the Feds, the Bill of Exchange, and the Bank of International Settlement, banking power. Triangle at the cost of the people controlling the gold /M1 opens the door for the 1963 to 5 complete banking takeover of the system. Now from all of this, you see Europe gets done, because as the chart continues, you start to see more pieces add on to it of relevancy. And then Africa and Asia, the Bandung Conference of 1955. MI issues certificates. You have to check out some of these conferences though, because when I checked it out, it blew my mind. I was like, wow, because even when I look at things like the Earth Charter, even though it's funded by the Rockefellers, there's a fight going on within the those who call themselves the Illuminated ones. That's actually working towards some want to go with world peace, and some's like, nah, fuck that. We just want to control everything, lay everything down, get down and lay down, So that's pretty much where it's at. I'm going through these charts to make sure you all are catching it. All right, now after the Bandung Conference, excuse me, Federal Reserve, Bill of Exchange, and the Bank of International Settlement never followed through. The split between Indonesians and Chinese that started in 1928 was triggered in 1934. Death of PBX widens and M1 looks to USA and JFK for help to lessen the Fed's power. You've seen in the bailout how much the Feds was involved with this, with the pretty much the decline of the whole entire world. And now you see at Russia and China, and Russia said they're gonna keep on dumping the U.S. bonds. They Treasury bonds. They're not taking it anymore. All right, now out of the JFK, the M1, and the shared ideal, 3 agreements: the Tampak Siren in Bali, a Washington Agreement, and the Green Hilton Memorial, linked in through the objective of as good as possible for as many as possible. Yo, you know what's deep too is Obama is from Indonesia. Don't let Bammy fool you. Don't let the Bamster fool you. You know, that's why it was such a great thing when they supposedly came on the world scene of you know, change and stuff. He from out of Indonesia. Now they had this picture. I wish I was looking for this picture everywhere and I couldn't find it. If somebody could find it, please send it to me. Where it's two it's Obama and it's this Indonesian cat, and they both smiling. Yo, they look identical. They look identically the same. And Obama's supposed to be the one. He's the one that has the bloodlines of all of them. You understand? You know what? I'm gonna end up. That's why I actually took that video. I'm gonna have to show y'all that again with the 12-year-old girl who pieced in how many people he was related to. But it goes even deeper than that because he's related to Vlad the Impaler. You know, you know, Dracula, Vlad. You know what I'm saying? Who fought against the Turks and the Ottoman Empire. He's related to him too. He's related to the Bushes, all of that stuff. Alright. Now, from the 3 agreements, you have a transfer from M1 to JFK to 140 million kilograms of gold to back a new US dollar issued by US Treasury in July of 1963. The objective is to replace the Fed with the U.S. Treasury as the issuer of U.S. dollars, signed on the 14th of November, 1963. That's what JFK did. He tried to move back to the gold standard. That's why they killed him. He actually signed it in order. He signed it. He put that presidential order out. And then right after he died, Lyndon B. Johnson, I think that was his successor, you know, he ended up actually signing it. And it says after, you know, he signed it on the 14th of November 1963. If you look right here, a few days later JFK is killed. Now you know JFK come from gangsters. You know what I'm saying? His pops was a gangster. You know what I mean? Bootlegging and all that other stuff. Around Noble Drew Ali time, you know. While Noble Drew Ali was running around out there, JFK pops was running around out there bootlegging liquor, making that bread, putting all his sons into politics. Alright? And they were Irish and Catholic, but they were Irish. And you know, they didn't really like him. The Anglos didn't really like, you know, that they was Irish and all of that. But let's moving along. Okay, a few days later, after JFK is killed, M1, 1964, key speech to build the world anew. He wants to start from scratch, a new UN, a new Fed, etc. So as we see, he keeps moving forward. M1 removed from power by CIA supported coup, held in house arrest until his death. Personal organization. Freemasonry is built exactly the same. 33 official degrees followed by 7 more unofficial layers of superiority. So how have they been able to pursue an agenda stretching over generations? It is very cleverly organized. The visible power structure we see in the news are only part of it. At the top of each little pyramid sits people who were carefully selected and groomed. You don't end up there by accident, and you don't have anywhere near the full picture. There's also the internal conflict within the system pushing for different agendas to consider. So you have your UN, your World Bank, your European Union, your International Monetary Fund, your Federal Reserve Bank, and your Bank of International Settlements. 555 top people in the bottom structure makes up the base for the next level. These people will work on mainly political systems and modules. Experiments like the Russian communist system as well as the USA free market system was and is discussed and contemplated here. Okay, let's see what works. Both are now deemed failures, with adjustments to the EU being the middle way. The very top level consists of just 16 people total. They control the finances and distribution of funds throughout the system. They issue and lend out gold-backed paper certificates. Terms are usually no more than 33 years and interest of 2 to 3% every year payable in gold. Now on this side you see M1, the Grand Masters, 3 people, Master Commitment, 5 people, Sub-Commitment Holders, 7 people, Financial Systems and Assets Control, Political Systems and Modules, Invisible Power Structure, and the Visible Power Structure. Now, one thing I want to bring up is, you know how everybody's always talking about, yo, we built the pyramids, we built the pyramids. The physical pyramid structure is a symbol of a civilized building structure. You understand? So everything they do is based on the science of the pyramids. In order to build a society or civilization, it has to be built on a pyramid. Now we're just going to take a brief break from this because this is almost finished, but we're going to take a brief break from that and we're going to check this out. We're going to check this out. This is what we're going to check out, people. This is the whole outline to masonry. Let me zoom in for you. Now first let me see if y'all can see the whole structure. Look at that right there. Look at it. Look at that right there. Y'all see that? Now you see that? Now let's check this thing out real quick. Alright. We go, because there's so much going on here and y'all got to be able to read the steps. So I'm going to take y'all first to the symbols and what's going on and everything. And, you know, let me zoom in for you. Real nice and fine, as much as possible. Now look at this. What, come on now. Now this is Solomon's temple. This is supposed to be Solomon's temple right here. Right? That's supposed to be Solomon's temple. Now you see that? That's the Masonic Bible with like a page. What do you call those things? A page saver, page reader, a bookmark. Excuse me, a bookmark. But the bookmark is the tassel for the fez. Y'all clearly see it. Look at it. Look at how the smoke is going up there to make a face from Solomon's temple with the fez there. And this is called the Scottish Rite. Now let's look at what's going on down here. Let me minimize this so you all can see it real clear. Now you see the words, the degrees. You see how this guy coming in, walking up, and he's pointing them up to the top of it. You can see all those degrees. Actually, I'm going to zoom in myself so I can see it. Give me 1 minute. Apologies. But what I can do is make it larger for you all, zoom out a little bit so we can look at it all at the same context. Well, what I'll do is I'll just I'm going to send you all a picture, but I want to go through it just briefly so you see all these colorful characters on here, right? Now look at what's going on here. See that? He's pointing them up there. And this is the Scottish Rite. You see the law, the Templar. And then when you go under the Ark, you see the Shriner, the Daughters of the Nile. Everybody with fezzes on. Allied organizations, the Order of Eastern Star, Tall Cedars of Lebanon, Job's Daughter, Rainbow Girl. See? Ancient Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master Mason. And these are the guys at the top of the pyramid. And on this side is your York Rite. Order of the Knights Templar is at the top. And they call the Sovereign, the 33-degree guys, the Sovereign Grand Inspector General. But the Order of the Knights Templar is at the top. They founded this because the Pope, you know, not necessarily that there's contention there, but the Pope, remember, he slaughtered and massacred the Knights Templar because they had gained too much power and wealth, so they had to go underground, and they reemerged as Freemasons because they came and got the knowledge from the Moors in the East, in the Holy Land. Now look at this guy looking like a rabbi, you know, Royal Master, Select Master, Super Excellent Master, all these, you know, titles. And everybody on this side got turbans and stuff. See? And you see these guys right here. So, you know, I just wanted to run that by you all. I'm going to zoom out so you all could get the whole look at the picture once more and see how the whole system is set up. And it's based on the pyramid structure. Now, the step pyramid is found over here in the Americas. They tried to make one in Egypt, but it failed. It wasn't good enough. Alright, so let's get back to this PDF real quick. And we're about to wrap it up. But I just had to show y'all that. Alright. Now, the underlying physical gold assets are safeguarded by a second group, not mentioned here. A third group functions as controllers. They can block any movements of funds that do not meet the agreed upon plan. Now, you see, you know, Marrakesh, we was on that, we was getting there. You know, only those who, you know, Illuminati know what I'm talking about, Sharu know what I'm talking about, a couple people know what I'm talking about. But this is who blocked us. This is who blocked us. I just want y'all to know that. This is who fucking blocked us. Alright? Because it didn't meet their plan. Alright? Now, to push movements and agendas, you need the right people in the right places with the right intentions. There's many ways to find and groom them. Listed below are a few. You can be assured that most, if not all, people who ends up in these positions of power were at some point picked, regardless of if they themselves realize it or not. Then to help their people get the job done, they always fall back to a very effective method. Create the problem, present the solution. This is how the masses are pushed along. Okay? The visible power structure, how they find the right people to staff and lead various organizations / nations to pursue their agenda. Plant schools. Remember we was talking about schools on Thursday's show? Places where people's values and intentions are explored and future leaders picked. They works as working forums and breeding ground for future leaders within primarily the visible power structure. Freemason lodges, other similar secret societies, CFR, Council of Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Group, Bohemian Grove, college societies like Skull and Bones, Thule Society, etc. Lucy's Trust, previously Lucifer's Trust, Club of Rome, various roundtables, etc. These 16 people were removed by banker-backed hardliners around 1965, 1968. Since then, the system has been hijacked and utilized for gaining more and more personal power and control over the natural resources and industrial assets of the planet. A raping of the planet has occurred since for the benefit of a very few whose ultimate goal is ultimate control. Okay, y'all see the structure? You see how everything lined up? The first visible attempt by bankers to hijack the system was in 1910, when the Jekyll Island Treaty created the seed of what became the Fed. How it has been used since 1965, when the banking cartel took control and hijacked it all. The Rothschilds built through bills of exchange. Vatican Bank. You see, the Vatican is always in the middle of things. This is what y'all people, you can't remove the Vatican from the equation. They've been running this since the days of Rome. The Roman emperors are nothing but the popes now. Holder of records and a very important player. Banking cartel hijacked the system in 1965. So here's how it works. For any macro funds to move within the banking system, BOE, the Fed, and BIS have to sign off. The Vatican Bank is an unofficial record keeper and as such has a big stake in the game. From the Fed angle, all the prime banks, AMRO, HSBC, Chase, Citibank, etc. BOE actually owns the Fed, or the majority share, and nothing can be done without its okay. The Fed funds are the prime banks in the world, such as AMRO, HSBC, Citibank, etc. These prime banks will then lend to various corporations around the world, especially targeting the multinationals. They can be grouped together in areas of interest, and it does not really matter where they originate from, because ultimately their source of funds is the same. Now out of HSBC it lends to what? Fortune 500 companies, etc. Banking, oil, gas, auto, medicine, food, building, and chemicals. And from the Fed owns the funds, huge foundations, and those huge foundations invest directly into the Fortune 500 companies. What few people realize is that the Fed also owns huge foundations that will invest directly into the same multinationals. In the financial world, these foundations will be perceived as being created by institutional money. So through two separate legs, they have a say and benefit from anything that happens among these corporations, because they control all through debt or stocks. BOE and the Fed also have the inside view of what is required to be able to utilize the huge M1 funds that were set up in 1946 to rebuild the world. Now they can go to work and start draining those funds. It is now very easy to understand how people like JFK and his brother Robert saw it as their mission to warn the world of this dark and growing power. They called it the industrial military complex, who they perceived were out to take over control of the USA and the world. They did the best they could to limit their reach, and both paid the ultimate price for it. So this is how you see the way that things flow. So the banks would systematically lend out money to regimes they knew would squander the loans on products their companies could provide. The intention was to make sure these countries ended up with debts they could never repay. Only corrupt and or military dictators need apply. Military government in South America in the 70s, corrupt government in Africa, anti-communist regime in Asia. Prime banks, they lend to these particular governments. Funds set aside for rebuilding the world in 1946 now ends up in the pockets of the owners of multinational corps. In reality, the money borrowed by nations never leave Washington. They just move from one account to the next, leaving a lot of third world nations in huge debt. Read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman for an inside view. I actually read that. Over-budgeted infrastructure projects deemed necessary by squadrons of economic hitmen working for Western companies by the 80s and 90s, nations now democratic, burdened by huge debts they cannot pay. Hat in hand, they go to the banks. 20 to 30 years later, military regimes have been replaced by democratic ones, wanting to do the right thing. They cannot repay these debts, and hat in hand approach the banks with what can we do? After some crisis and mulling somebody presents the concept of swaps, like credit default swaps. I know you heard that a lot during the bailout. That means multinationals will bid for and buy anything that is worth anything in that country, but pay to the bank for it. It's like when you got a crib in foreclosure, you don't pay the person who's on the note for the debt. You pay the bank if you want the property. Again, money have never left Washington, but just shifted from account to account. But all mineral rights, oil rights, logging rights, everything of value in these countries are now owned by multinationals, all of which are ultimately owned and controlled by the owners of the BOE and the Fed, using a system where they can create money out of nothing to lend out with interest. They now own the world, but they still want more control. Objectives and values of some of the people now running the world. The Jewish people and its beliefs have to go. The Aryans, the chosen ones. Population control target 1 to 1.5 billion. Garden of Eden wrongly perceived. Lucifer wants to help humanity and not keep them in the dark. Lucifer is the bringer of enlightenment. Very simplified. You can divide today's controllers of the system into hardliners and softliners. Regardless, there are some things they agree on. Above is a list of some of them. The Thule Society is what created Hitler. It picks out, educates, plus finance. This was the Jewish people and his beliefs have to go. Hardliners who knew about the coming freedom war and World War II used that knowledge to set up and educate Hitler. The war was unavoidable, but it could have played out very differently. German industrialists connected to a secret university society called the Thule Society picked out, supported, and educated Hitler. He was their man and their product. Okay, the German University from the Thule Society creates the Skull and Bones, which was created by Yale University. Now, you know Yale University just suspended their charter for 5 years. So the Skull and Bones is inactive right now, at least, or that might just be something they saying to throw us off, but that's what was in the news. A copy of Thule Society can be found in Yale in America. It's called Skull and Bones. It is interesting to see how the German connections to the ex-President Bush family runs for generations through these secret societies. Now, if you've seen the advertisement for this presentation, you would have actually seen that on the bone for the Skull and Bones, in what they have in their encasement, it has Thor on one of the bones. The Norse deity. So Bush's grandfather finances and supplies material for Hitler, and the ex-president, ex-CIA, and the 43rd president, all coming out of Skull and Bones. Some of this stuff we already know. George Bush's grandfather was in his day taken to court for supplying materials and financing Hitler while America was still at war with him. It is amazing to find in today's world that Hitler's values and goals are still very much alive among the very top levels of our societies. But it is more understandable when you realize that Hitler did not create those values, but learned them from his masters. Those masters are still around in a different form. Another thing you have to realize is that Hitler had a quote that said, "The Moor has done his job. Now it is time for him to go." A lot of people don't talk about how many Moors he killed on his little rampage, but he pretty much decimated that population out there. See, that he was getting rid of that original Bavarian or Germanic, or Mare Germanicum, or the Moors that was in Germany. Remember we showed you I showed you that tapestry of the Moors who was in Germany. You see? So it is what it is. Now, one common value is the belief that the world can only sustain 1 to 1.5 billion people. The earth cannot handle any more than that. That means that 4.5 to 5 billion of us will have to go. How is where they get divided into hardliner versus softliners. Hardliners, anyway, okay, population control needs to be quick or we will be a new Atlantis. Wars, famine, disease, DNA manipulation, and food. Hardliners will say things like, any way possible. It just needs to be quick or we will end up like another Atlantis. Let God decide who lives or die. But whatever we decide is okay by him, since otherwise he would not have placed us in this position of power. A scary argument if there ever was one. Okay. The softliners will say things like, we agree on the goal, but we can reach it through education and togetherness, etc. It will take time, but we can get there. Recently, softliners within the system have reached out to the old gold people who have stayed underground since '65 to try and rein in the worst of the hardliner elements. The gold people have had no say for a long time, but banks still have old gold certificates ticking at interest payable in gold in their vaults as funds, and that is leverage. Now, I remember there was a Senate committee hearing where they asked Ben Bernanke and some other guys from the Federal Reserve, and they said, well, don't you have all of the gold? Why? No, Ron Paul was actually asking them, why do you have gold certificates if you have no gold? They said, well, the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury took all of the gold in the 30s. All we have is the certificates. And he kept saying, so what is the certificates valued at? He said, how come the value of these, Ron Paul asked him and said, how come the value of these certificates, had the rate or the interest rate hasn't changed or fluctuated as much as the U.S. dollar? So he was digging in their chest. So this is the Federal Reserve is still holding the gold certificates that the U.S. Treasury took from it, took out of their gold vaults, and they still have those certificates till this day. It's out there. It's actually, you can check the video out. Within this old gold standard system, there are checks and controls in place. The controls are built as triangles where the three parties should not know or have direct contact with each other. This formula is repeated throughout the system on all levels. The banking cartel probably thought they could hijack the system for good once they got the fiat currency system, paper money with just faith backing it, fully in place and accepted by all. That was a gradual process finally finalized once Nixon effectively took the US dollar off of its tie to gold. It seems as if the banking world miscalculated the strength of the control systems and are only now coming to the realization that they will need the cooperation of the gold people. That is why we in the future will see a shift in focus of funds from the West towards Asia and eventually Africa. Now you see what I'm talking about, what's going on in Zimbabwe, where Mugabe is being backed by the Asians now, by the Chinese, and he effectively put his currency on a gold standard. The M1 position is on one of these 3 points. M1 acts as a holder, H, of the assets. He will act as the front face of owner, but actually does not have anything to do with owning underlying hard assets. It is a management position. The accounts will be in his name and he signs for a lot of it. He has the right to 2.5%, basically the interest of funds under his management. He is supported by a team of 70 people directly underneath him. One of the opposite side of M1 at the base of the triangle there is the owner, OW, of the hard assets. They will sit on and control the underlying physical assets. These are the assets that were legalized. Legalized means that a company came and inspected the assets plus issued a certificate that were based on said assets. Now the certificate can easily be moved and lent out at interest while the underlying asset never have to. This certainly makes banking a whole lot easier. No need to cart thousands of tons of gold around. The third top level is that of the controller, C, ultimate green light for use of any assets. He can stop anything the others decide on but rarely instigate macro fund movements. It seems the Chinese royals, KS, kept this part within their bloodline. All 3, H, OW, and C signatories are required for utilization of any given asset. The same controller, C, can sign for hundreds of different accounts, and their position code within the system is 333. Another position code within the system is 666, which is one of the higher authority than 333. At this point in time, that master POA or power of attorney paper is still waiting for a name to be filled in. The old gold people also talks of these code positions as periods. Supposedly the 666 period is to be a transition period leading to a 999 period of ultimate peace and happiness on earth. They in turn get their information and prophecies from, among other things, an ancient gold book that contains everything from beginning to end of the human drama on earth. It is believed to be a part of what King Solomon left here together with his sword. It can only be read by selected priests using a specific tool. The Freemasons, which basically is the more visible part of the Templar Knights, is built up much the same as the rest of the system. The visible base has 33 levels, and you think you are at the top if you reach 33-degree Mason. They do a lot of good around the world and are serious play in allocating funds for various projects. It is unclear though what or who is actually at the very top and the spirit they worship. Above the 33-degree Mason, there are again 7 more layers leading to the ultimate King of Kings. But see, after you reach the 33rd degree, your next step is to become a Shriner, which is pretty much practicing Islam. And you can't even be a Shriner until you like 50 something. And you got to be a 33-degree Mason. At this level, there's a lot of work with spirit. All profess to be working for God, but perceptions of God will vary. Some will say it's Christ that should sit at the top. Others will claim Lucifer is the good one. See, in the Old Testament, Christ was Lucifer, because if you check the New Testament, it says that Christ is the son of the morning star, and that's what the Old Testament says Lucifer's name is. That's what Lucifer means, son of the morning star. You see, and the morning star is what? The morning star is the star that rises in the east. You see, it's all symbology and stuff. But if you read what Albert Pike said about pretty much using Islam and Christianity to destroy each other, and then at the end of everything, Lucifer is supposed to come with the true religion, and they revere Lucifer as the enlightened one or the illuminated one. But see, Lucifer isn't Satan. That's the other thing people got to peep the malarkey in. Lucifer is the son of the morning star. Lucifer is not Satan. You see what I'm saying? So I don't want to get too metaphysical here, but you know, we can save that for another time. Time will tell who ultimately takes the throne on a permanent basis. So that's pretty much the end of this PDF. It gets into some other stuff that I don't particularly agree with, as far as sound a little bit too sovereign citizenship for me. But I appreciate the brother working on it and you know, handing it off to me. But pretty much, you know, I know it's late. I don't want to hold anyone any longer than necessary. But I hope that I've clarified some things, and you know, clarified how this ultimately, all of this stuff is a stolen legacy of the Moors, and from the culture to the wealth to the estates to the assets, and you know, brought it home and made it relative for everybody. You know, I really appreciate all of you who paid to view this. This won't be viewable to anyone other than you guys. It's going to be edited and put on DVD, and other people are going to have to buy it for $25 if they want to see it. But I really appreciate you all coming in and checking this out. I hope the information was relative. You know, time goes so quickly. I wanted to get into a little more, had a little bit more things planned, but I guess I'll just save it for another presentation that I'll be doing soon. So without further ado, I'm going to say peace, Islam, honors, and thank you all for joining in tonight. And we signing off at 12:22 a.m. Y'all the best.